Welcome to the TalentGrow Show, where you can get actionable, results-oriented insight and advice on how to take your leadership, communication, and people skills to the next level and become the kind of leader people want to follow. And now, your host and leadership development strategist, Halelly Azulay.
Hey there, welcome back to the TalentGrow Show. I'm Halelly Azulay, your leadership development strategist, and this time I have an author and futurist on the show. I love doing this show so much because I get to learn from really smart people. And this show is no different. My guest, Alexandra Levit, is someone who focuses a lot of her time on studying and teaching others about the different generations in the workforce, and especially how millennials can be successful at work and how leaders can be successful leading millennials. And millennials are the youngest generation in the workforce. Currently, Gen Z is right behind them, and we talk about both of those generations. So whether you are a member of the millennial generation or you are somebody who works with them or leads them, no matter where you look at this, there's a lot of really juicy information that Alex shares with us about the future, about how best to work with them, about how to lead them, about how to be one of them as a leader, about their career development, and really sage advice for ways in which millennials can do well to prepare themselves for future leadership success. And we even talk about robots and the future of the workforce. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and thanks for tuning in. Welcome back to the TalentGrow Show. This is Halelly Azulay. I'm your leadership development strategist, and I am excited to introduce you to my guest, Alexandra Levit. She prepares organizations and their employees for meaningful careers in the future workplace. She's a former nationally syndicated columnist for the Wall Street Journal and writer for the New York Times, Fast Company, and Forbes. She's the author of several books, including the international bestseller, They Don't Teach Corporate in College. She's also a researcher, consultant, speaker, and business owner, and regular national media personality. Alex, welcome to the TalentGrow Show.
Thanks, Halelly. It's so great to be here.
I'm excited that you're here, and thank you for taking the time to share your insights with our listeners. And before we get started with all of your juicy insights, I always ask my guests to describe their professional journey very briefly so that we can get a sense of where have you been and how did you get to where you are?
Certainly. Well, it's a winding path. I graduated from Northwestern University, which is here in the Chicago area where I'm calling in from. In 1998, I was determined to go out into the business world and be a VP by the age of 30. And needless to say, that's not quite how it worked out. I crashed and burned in my first several jobs. It took me 3 years to get a promotion. I had a lot of stress. I was upset and in tears a lot of the time. And so one of my managers took pity on me and sent me to personal development classes. Specifically, she sent me to Dale Carnegie. And that was when I learned the importance of things like making a good positive impression, being diplomatic, being able to cooperate with people who have different perspectives than you. And this light bulb went off. And I was like, wow, someone should really clue in other 20-somethings on what they need to do to be successful. And that was when I got the idea for my first book, which was published in 2004. And it was called They Don't Teach Corporate in College, a 20-somethings guide to the business world. And when I wrote the book, I expected it to be kind of a one-off side project, because when I finally started learning these lessons, I got a promotion and I was doing pretty well in my communications career. So I just thought that I would keep going with that. But much to my pleasure and surprise, the book did well, and it led to a whole new consultancy as a business and workplace author and speaker. And I've been moving in the last few years more into the HR space to talk to leaders about what's required for 21st century leadership and to be successful in such an endeavor. And I've also moved more into the futurist arena, so helping organizations predict what's going to be happening within the world of work for the next 10 to 20 years and how they can, again, prepare to be successful.
And I've always admired futurists. Like, that seems to me like such an impossible kind of job. I can't even imagine how I would know, like, how do you even predict what's in the future? And so maybe we can talk a little bit more about that, because it's so intriguing and inspiring.
Sure. Well, I think that the thing about the current mindset, at least among the young futurists that I know, is that futurist is really a term that anybody can use. It's about having a point of view where you consider a variety of different perspectives of a variety of different potential outcomes, and you choose the one that you think makes the most sense based on where you're seeing, everyone uses Twitter now, but it's like almost where you see like little twitterings or little tweets here and there where things are becoming more and more viral, more and more popular, and you try to put that together to assess where the trend is going to be in 5 to 10 or even 20 years. And I think anyone can do it. It's not something you need to go to school for. It's just a matter of paying attention to what's going on and hearing what people are starting to talk about and sort of project that into the future. And I think that's what I try to do. I started doing that. I think the very first thing I started doing it with was the millennial generation, because when I published They Don't Teach Corporate in College, it was right at the time when the first millennials were starting to graduate from college. And I noticed right away that they were different a little bit than previous generations. Not so much that they were different inherently, that there was something like in their DNA that was different, but just the way that they'd been raised was a bit different. And the fact that they were willing to speak up earlier and in a younger age than other generations. And so I noticed really early on that there were going to be some issues with these guys integrating into the workforce and being prepared for success and for future leadership. And so back in 2004, I was talking about the millennials. No one else was talking about the millennials then. Mm-hmm. And 12 years later, I'm still getting up to a dozen inquiries per week about millennials. And so that's an example of, I wasn't trained as a futurist, but it's just about kind of thinking about, this is happening. What's it going to mean in the next few years, and what are organizations going to have to contend with? So
very
that's
cool.
what it's all about.
Yeah. Oh, super. And so there's so much to ask you about, and there's so much we can talk about. And I know that, I also get asked sometimes to talk about the different generations in the workplace. And I know that there's also a lot of people that when you bring that topic up, they wrinkle their nose and make, and make disapproving kind of faces, because I think to some people it feels like it offends them in probably one of two ways. One, they think it's like voodoo or something, like you're just making stuff up and you're lumping people into these weird categories that you have no foundation for. Or they feel like you're putting people in boxes and it feels to them like almost a type of discrimination, or stereotyping. So I know that this has been discussed a lot, and I don't want that to be the main topic of this podcast. But before we move any further, maybe let's just kind of talk about the elephant in the room and address that from your expert perspective. Why should people think about generations differently?
I think it's a great question. It's fair. Whenever I do a session with leaders, I try to start off by saying, look, and we all recognize that these are generalizations. But that said, these generalizations, at least the ones I tend to make, are based on research, meaning that over the course of my career, I've interacted with about 50,000 young professionals through surveys, through podcasts and research groups. And, there was a time when I was getting, quite a lot of like interactive feedback on my blog and my articles. And so I feel really immersed in the situation as it stands and as it has evolved over the past 12 years. And so when I make generalizations, I tend to at least make sure that they are grounded in some research that we can measure. And an example of that is when I'm talking about the differences between the two cohorts of millennials. Most people don't realize that the older millennials are qualitatively different than the younger millennials in many aspects of their behavior and motivation. And this just has to do with the age that they were when they graduated from college. And this is also something that I should bring up. When I talk about millennials from my perspective, these are educated millennials. These are people who tend to be middle class or above. I don't claim to know all that much or to be an expert in young people that are not on that, so I guess, the path of to becoming future leaders. I think that makes a little bit of a difference. But from what I've seen, I think that there are certain generalizations that can be made just based on the research that's been conducted. Now, are these generalizations going to be true for every single individual? Absolutely not. And it's critical that when people listen to something like this, they realize, okay, well, we're generally talking about trends. We're not talking about every characteristic of every person that exists. But what might you generally see? And it's the same goes for other generations as well. It's not just the younger ones. It's when we look at the baby boomers as a group, like what were some of their most frequently cited motivations, for example? I mean, these are things that you can measure. And I think it's important to have some sort of a sense of the differences because of the fact that they are generally true. And when you are, I've universally heard this thing from hundreds of companies. And so when you keep running into the same issues over and over again, then it sort of behooves you to at least have some solutions in your pocket. Now, it's great if you've got a group where none of it pertains to you. I mean, hey, more power to you. But I think in most situations, people will find at least some of the content to be relevant and true to their own experiences.
Great. Thank you for that. So let's just dig right in. So the audience of this podcast is thinking about their leadership skills, and either they are currently in a leadership role, and therefore they might have a perspective about this from the side of having to lead millennials, or maybe even the newer generation, Generation Z, Gen Z. Or they might themselves be part of those generations and are developing their own leadership skills, or are already leading others. So what might be a couple of tips that you can give from either side of that equation, either being a great leader to the younger generations or being a great leader as someone who is a member of those?
Okay. That's a great example. I think that the advice that I would give to leaders first and foremost is that one size no longer fits all. People will, at least in the old days, they would have gone to leadership training and learned how to be a leader. And you really have to be a leader differently depending on who you're dealing with. And the millennials as a group are one of the reasons that this has been pushed, because from a very young age, they've been assertive enough to speak up for what they need. And that is different for every individual. And one of the ways that this was crystallized for me recently, actually this week, it's sort of hot off the press. I am a member of a group called the Career Advisory Board that was established by DeVry University in 2010. I'm a co-founder. We did some research on most desirable forms of employment, and we talked to people of all ages. But what was very surprising is a lot more people than I expected were saying they weren't really into this whole trend of flex work, that they really, post-recession, were looking at more stability and job situations that were more traditional. And this just echoed this feeling that I have that if you're a manager, you really need to take a step back and talk to people about what they want and what job circumstances really fit their lifestyle and what kind of training and development will suit where they see their career path going. Because just like we were thinking, wow, everybody wants flexibility, this is something everyone wants. Well, that's not necessarily the case. It really depends on the individual. So just to sum up, it's this one size fits all mentality really doesn't work in today's day and age. And you have to be willing to sit down with each employee as an individual and assess what's most important to that person and how you as a manager can help them get there and help them assess their performance and their skill acquisition in real time. Because as we're seeing with the growth of agile performance, there is no such thing as just hearing from someone when they have a quarterly review or even a half year or even an annual review. We really have to be on top of it as leaders on an everyday basis. Now, on the other side of the coin, for people who are developing their leadership skills, I would say that don't focus so much on the official promotion into leadership, that in today's organizations, people really want you to prove that you are ready for a certain role and that you're in fact doing it before you are officially promoted into a position. So what you want to be doing is looking at the skill set of the person who is a manager, the person who is a VP, the person who's on the executive team. And you want to be actually looking at what they do and looking at their job descriptions and see if there's a gap in the skills that you have. So for example, in many organizations that are global competence, or the understanding of business as it pertains to different cultures, is something that more and more leaders have to possess. If that's something where you're a little weak, well, you have to look for opportunities to be able to expand your repertoire. Maybe you take courses, maybe you talk to people who've worked overseas, maybe you read some books, maybe you even do a short stint and just travel around a little bit and get some of the sense of it yourself. But these are things that in various companies are going to be increasingly important for you to take the reins in as a senior person in one of these organizations. So it's really something that you have to be proactive about. And yes, you should definitely talk to your manager and get their input and feedback, and also if they're mentors you have. certainly that should be appropriate. But it's something that today's organizations aren't going to necessarily tell you, well, this is where your career is going to go, particularly because we're now in a lattice career situation where a lot of people aren't moving from point A to point B to point C. So they wouldn't be able to tell you even if you wanted them to, or even if they wanted to. It's going to differ for every individual, and it's something you have to take control of from your own perspective.
I agree so much. I speak about this all the time, write about it all the time, because the idea that people try to create a one size fits all leadership or feedback or development approach is, I mean, I don't think it's ever been true, but it's definitely never been more of a time in the workplace where it was completely rejected by the workforce, right? Like, so this is where I think the millennials are probably extremely different, is that maybe it didn't really work for their predecessors, but the predecessors perhaps felt like, you just got to suck it up and just do it because this is what we do. And these people are saying, it's not working for me now. Let me voice my opinion about that. Is that true?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's one of the differences that they've made as a group, coming in and just saying, let me speak up. I'm not going to wait until I'm in a position of so-called authority. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna say it now. And because they have such numbers, that's what they have in their favor, is there's just so many of them that they've really managed to make a significant impact. I think it's wonderful. The changes that they've driven so quickly are really exciting to see. And there are things at the end of the day, people ask me, what are the real differences between generations? I don't think there are really that many inherent differences. I think the millennials are speaking up about what everybody wants. And so that's a benefit to everyone.
Great. I love that distinction. So, oh my God, I have so many follow-up questions that I want to ask you. I'm trying to be choosy. So I know the one thing that people like to say, and there's so many stereotypes about the younger generation, but I think that one of them is that they seem like they want to jump too quick, and you just gave a suggestion that they would want to first develop the skills before stepping into a role that requires them. And those seem to be at odds. So what might you say to a manager or a leader who is faced with someone who seems really impatient to move up, who maybe doesn't get the whole lattice workplace arrangement, or is seeing a promotion or a higher responsibility as a sign that, as sort of the right kind of feedback that they're doing great? And how do you have a conversation with them about their need to further develop and be more proactive about finding their own way to develop those skills before they're actually ready?
Mm-hmm. Well, Halelly, that's a great question. And this does happen because obviously sometimes the more motivated and hungry people are in their careers, and that tends to happen at a younger age, the more impatient they are to move up. And the first thing that I would do is I would cite the statistic. I participated in a study with the Deloitte looking at millennial leadership. And when we surveyed a lot, it was several thousand global millennial employees. And we found that about half of them were already in leadership positions. This was in 2014, so about 2 years ago. And when we asked them, did you feel ready for being in this position when you were promoted? A full third of them said they weren't ready, and that it caused them a lot of stress and a lot of agita and a lot of pain. And so the first thing that I would tell them is, you don't want to be in a situation where you're set up to fail. And so I'm trying to give you all of the foundation that you need so that by the time you get into that role, you're set up to be successful, because you don't want to be in a situation where it's the Peter principle, right? The cream rises until it sours. You keep getting promoted until you're in a position of incompetence, and you're in a position where you're not going to be able to do a good job. And nobody wants that. And unfortunately for a lot of millennials, that's what's happening to them because of the difference in demographics, where you have retiring baby boomers, you have a very small X generation in the middle, not enough Xers to take over for the boomers. So you do actually see a lot of millennials being promoted at younger ages, an average of about 10 years earlier.
Wow.
And that's the reason that we see a lot of people that are unprepared. And so I would take the whole big picture in front of the person who's overeager and say, like, this is what I don't want to happen to you. And there's actually a lot of fun stories around the Peter principle and how it's happened in various famous circumstances. And I don't need to go into those now, but if you're a manager, do some research on the Peter principle, and you'll find that it's actually a great argument for persuading people that, slow down, take this opportunity to learn individual skills that are really going to help you regardless of where you decide to go in your career, because you might not stay here, you might go somewhere else, and actually to take care of yourself. And I say in my book, Blind Spots, I mean, the really underrated thing about being an individual contributor is the ability to focus on yourself and what you need. Once you become a senior leader, it's not about you anymore. It's about the organization. It's about the people who work for you. And you'll miss the time where you could have spent developing yourself. And so that's what if I was a manager, that's what I would say to that person who is a little bit impatient, is use this time because you'll never have it again. It's kind of like what you tell a high school or college student, when they're so eager to get out into the work world. It's like, you're going to have the rest of your life to work, but you only have one chance to go to college or be a high school student. So live it up. It's sort of the same principle if you think about it.
Yes. And they'll probably still not listen to us because
probably not. Yeah.
We're just the old people. What do we know?
Yeah.
So funny. So, okay. Well, let's look into the future a little bit, since you are now a futurist. Mm-hmm. And I know that one of your talks is Workforce 2030, and you probably have all kinds of other stuff cooking. But since we have you for a little bit here, what are some really important things we should know about the future, especially as it pertains to leadership?
Well, I think that probably the most interesting thing that we're going to see happen is that machines, as they become smarter and smarter, are going to become members of our teams. And so right now what we see is through deep learning and artificial intelligence that machines are able to speak languages, they're able to recognize patterns. And it's only a matter of time before they're able to do a lot of the tasks that we already do. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean, I know there's a lot of scare out there that robots will take over all our jobs. Right. That's probably not going to happen. But what is going to happen is that robots or algorithms are going to be an everyday part of the business operations and processes that we engage in. And so for that, we're going to need to understand what's the best way to manage an algorithm. Like, how do you teach an algorithm to respond to humans? How can you teach an algorithm to have good judgment? I think this is a really, really important question leaders are going to need to take into consideration. Leaders are also going to have to realize that there's really going to be no such thing as managing like your traditional full-time workforce anymore. That the workforce will be one that's very fluid. It will consist of a lot of contract workers from all over the world who have different priorities and are coming to the table with different types of experiences. And the role of the leader will almost be one of talent assembler, where you are just sourcing people from whenever, wherever, depending on the immediate business need. And so the leader is going to be really a strategic, almost like a person who's overseeing a chess game, constantly moving pieces around. And you may be moving different pieces around depending on the situation, depending on the business objective. And I think that's not something that we're all used to. We're used to having a relatively stable workforce, and that's not going to be the case probably starting within the next 5 years.
Wow. And let's layer in what you know about Gen Z, since you've been studying them, mm-hmm. and given that they will be joining those mixed teams that are being curated. So what would be something that managers and leaders might be doing differently because of having those people in the workforce?
Well, first of all, Halelly, I love Gen Z. What I've studied and researched about them so far, they are wonderfully independent. They love to hack their education. And by that, I mean that they decide they want to learn about something, and instead of waiting for a teacher to instruct them on it or asking their parents, they just go to Google or they go to Siri and they ask the question.
Yes.
Like, tell me about the Civil War. I want to learn more about that. And they dig really deep into things that they're interested in. And so leaders will have to be prepared for them in the sense that this is a very independent generation that doesn't really like to be boxed in. They are actually the supreme gig workers because they're used to short-term projects. They're used to being proactive and going out and learning what they need to learn to get something done. And that's going to be exactly what is needed in the gig economy of the 21st century. So I think that they're going to be a force to be reckoned with for sure. And again, just like with every other type of employee, you'll need to have an individual approach. They're going to be very different in terms of the way they learn. Many Gen Zers are even telling us they don't intend to go to college because they don't see the value in college. That's very interesting. And this is even, among middle class or upper middle class families, the Gen Zers are saying, well, unless it's for networking, I don't really see the point of getting an education at college. Like, why do I need to spend $200,000 when I can just learn everything I need to learn online? And there's something to be said for that, but that's just an example of how they're being a little bit more unorthodox in how they are doing things. And so leadership is going to have to bend to that a little bit and say, okay, maybe if you have the skills, it doesn't matter that you didn't graduate from Yale or Harvard. And I think that's going to be a change. So we'll see how they cope with it. Hopefully well.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds exciting. I totally see the signs of that in my own life. And I tend to agree with them that the pendulum is swinging in the other direction in terms of, everyone must have a college degree. That hasn't been true for a long time, but I think that it will be more and more accepted as no longer true as we go forward. Mm-hmm. Wow. It's exciting times. So we can talk about that probably for another whole episode. But given that we are running out of time, I want to make sure that we get to I have the same bookend questions in every episode that include you giving a super actionable piece of advice. But first, what is most exciting on your horizon? Like, what's got your energy riled up these days?
Well, my energy is really riled up around implementation of some of these future-focused concepts. So an example, Halelly, would be flex work, and the fact that 64 approximately percent, and I think this is a World of Work study from last year, 64% of organizations are allowing some type of flex arrangement for their employees. So people might allow 4 days a week in the office, 1 from home. They might allow a job role flexibility where you can work in a different location and in a different function. So it's being allowed, but what we're not seeing is the ROI that's associated with such flex arrangements. Most organizations, in fact, 97% of organizations, have absolutely no clue whether the flex arrangements that they are offering are actually productive for the business and actually generate a positive return on investment, which is extraordinarily scary to me. Yeah. And so what I'm excited about is helping organizations figure out, okay, well, is this actually working for the bottom line of the organization? And if not, how can we get it to work? How can we give employees what they need? How can we be on trend, but at the same time do something that's actually smart? And so I think that's where we just don't see a lot of activity right now. We see organizations being excited about trends like, oh, yes, of course, flex work, rah, rah, we're all on board. But we do not see it connecting back to what's best for the business. And same thing for things like contract workers and machines participating on our teams. Like, is that a good thing? Is it a good thing that we're automating certain things? Like, where is the business benefit in these trends? And so I'm excited about that portion of my business and hopefully seeing some real concrete implementations within the next couple of years.
Wow. Well, I need to connect you with one of my friends, Freddie Odegaard, who talks about how he thinks all managers are going to be replaced by machines.
I'd love to.
He talks about the post-lean world and post-lean leadership, and this is one of his predictions, which is kind of scary.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, people ask me this question all the time, like, do I think that robots are going to replace everyone? And what I think is going to happen is that there's going to be many more job categories created that we can't even envision yet. I mean, everybody thought with the Industrial Revolution that humans would all be replaced then because everybody worked in factories and we invented so many more categories. I mean, just look at the job title social media manager that in 1995 did not exist. And now it's one of the leading things that people advertise for on sites like Upwork. Right. Well, that's going to continue to happen. And also, I tend to believe that wherever there's a machine, there needs to be a human being behind it that builds it, that maintains it, that supports it, and that fixes it when it breaks. So I think that as machines get smarter and smarter, I think we're still going to require a lot of humans to be behind the scenes, making sure they're working properly.
I totally agree. And just new and different kinds of jobs, just like people used to freak out about, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to the horse and buggy drivers, right?
Exactly.
We're good. So cool. Well, I really, I've loved everything that you've shared. Give us one really specific action that you can suggest listeners take today or this week to upgrade their own leadership or workplace future readiness skills that can help them immediately.
Well, I encourage everyone who's listening today to be an evangelist for the future workplace. There's nothing about me necessarily that makes me an expert. Everyone can be an expert. So take one of these topics that you're personally passionate about that you find fascinating. Maybe it's the machine machines as learners and machines as participants in the future workforce. Maybe it's contract workers. Maybe it's flex work. Maybe it's the Internet of Things. Take one thing and just learn, be a Gen Zer, learn as much about it as you can, and then starting talking to people within your organization. Like, how can we make sure that we are following this trend and that we're implementing this trend to the best of our ability, and be a spokesperson within your own organization. And that is how these things take off. And by being on the early side of things, you can really establish a name for yourself and a reputation for yourself as someone who's forward thinking and is doing things that are in the best interest of the organization, and someone who is innovative, because most organizations are really prizing innovation this year. So not this year, this decade, this century probably. So I think it's something that everybody can do. You don't just need to wait for an expert to tell you. You can really, if something piques your interest, go out and research it and start talking to people about it.
Such smart advice. I think that's really unique and very valuable, because instead of waiting and reacting and preparing yourself, like you're going to sit home and the storm will hit and you're trying to have it just not touch you, actually go out, be in front and be a leader and an innovator and an initiator. Oh my gosh, I love that so much. Thank you, Alex.
Welcome. And even if people are, I think I hear too from people, oh, I'm a baby boomer, like I'm going to be retiring. Like one of the issues I'd love to see more baby boomers take a leadership role in is, how should baby boomers be continuing to contribute once they've quote unquote retired? Because that too is changing, where we don't have the type of knowledge, we don't need the type of knowledge transfer that we used to need, because they can keep working and they can keep participating in key projects where they can offer their expertise. So I would love to see some baby boomer leaders step up and say, I'm going to help organizations figure out how to do this. Because I can tell you, even the organizations that are doing research on this and know it's coming, internally, if you ask them what they're doing with their senior partners, they're not doing it. They're talking about it, but they're not doing it. So I would love to see some people who have a vested interest in this step up and be spokespeople and be evangelists for making this happen, because it needs to happen.
Cool. And so that gives everybody a chance to contribute and to use your advice, because no matter what generation you're in, from your vantage point, there's a lot to be gained from following your suggestion.
That's right.
Alex, right. Super. Thank you. And so I'd like to link to studies that you recommend and other things in the show notes. Where and how can people stay in touch with you, learn more from you, and hear more from all that awesome research you're doing?
Sure. Well, thank you. I would recommend two websites. AlexandraLevit.com has all the information about me. So that's AlexandraLevit.com. And then also I mentioned a couple studies from DeVry University's Career Advisory Board. The one of which I mentioned is going to be published this week. So you guys are literally learning about it first. And you can find those studies. We talk about job preparedness, successful job seekers, what makes people successful hiring managers, all of those related things on careeradvisoryboard.org. So that's careeradvisoryboard.org.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing your insights and advice today with us, Alex. And I know people are going to love it and start following you en masse. And so until the next time, make today great.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Pretty amazing, right? And I hope that you take Alexandra up on her suggestion that you get out front and start really digging into something, some aspect of this future world that intrigues you, and become an expert on it. Just a personal note, I have just recently returned from a self-development conference that I attended in Austin, where one of the topics was this idea about the future of the human race and artificial intelligence, and whether our brains are going to be uploaded to the cloud, and whether we're going to be able to replicate our brains into these sort of secondary beings and outsource some of the work, and then should we treat them as humans and give them rights? I mean, it was mind-blowing. But this particular episode is definitely not quite so esoteric. It is just much more practical and useful for all of us in our present day work, and I think that it'll be useful for us going into the near-term future. So I'd love to know what you thought about it and get some feedback from you via the comments on my show notes page, which is where I also link to everything we mentioned in the show. And that's at talentgrow.com/podcast/
Ep042. And of course, you can also tweet at me. You can send me an email, halelly@talentgrow.com. And what I would really love is for you to help other people discover the show by leaving us a rating and a review on iTunes. That makes such a huge difference, and it really won't take very long of your time. So if you find value in this show and you want it to be successful in reaching more people, I really would appreciate that. So anyway, until the next time, I hope you make today great. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the TalentGrow Show, where we help you develop your talent to become the kind of leader that people want to follow. For more information, visit talentgrow.com.